Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I am Jessica Johnson, and if we haven't met yet, I am here to share freelance copywriting tips with you so that you can find more freedom and fulfillment building a freelance writing business. I previously built an agency and scaled my business to multi-six figures, so I am here to share only what works and really things that I found along the way that can hopefully serve you as well. So today I want to share with you 3 tech tools that can make a big difference in getting started in a content writing career. Now, with content writing, you are writing content for businesses like blog posts, social media, maybe some email newsletters, or ebooks or guides or client testimonials, case studies, that kind of thing. And one of the most amazing things about this as a side hustle or an entire business is that you don't need a ton of fancy tech to get started. You don't have a ton of startup costs, you don't have a ton of bells and whistles and things that you might need in another business. For example, other businesses, you might need to put together an entire website. You might need to hire a branding specialist or develop a logo or all these kind of fancy things like that. And you don't really need that to get started with freelance writing. A lot of times people think that you do because it's this perception that you need this huge online presence in order to get clients. But I can speak from experience that you really actually don't need a lot to start bringing clients in, to start generating an income, and to get started. You can always add the fancy stuff later, but you don't really need it to actually start getting your first paying clients. Okay, so in this video, I'm going to share with you 3 helpful tech tools that, because of the nature of freelance writing and what I just mentioned, are completely optional. But if you are looking for something to take it up a notch, or to just know what's out there for later down the line, here's a few things to think about. Now, the first one, and I think the most universally used, at least in my experience, because that's all I can speak to, would be Google Docs. So if you have never used Google Docs before, if you've been more into like Microsoft Word or things like that, it's essentially the Microsoft version of that. But the really cool thing about Google Docs is that you can write into it. So basically, you pull from your Gmail account, your email account, and you open up a Word file that's called a Google Doc file. And you can write copy into there, you can edit copy, and all across that, the different times that you open up that Google Doc across other versions, other computers, it will keep up to date with whatever revisions that you have made. So you may have used this before. This may be one that you've used all the time in your work, depending on what your background is. But if you haven't, it's really, really handy because if you change something in a title, great, it changes it no matter what computer you are looking at it from. And that can be really helpful when working with clients because if they suggest an edit, if they suggest a revision, if they make a change directly in the doc, then you can see it and you don't have to keep track of sending all these versions back and forth in your email. So that's pretty nice, right? So I fell in love with Google Docs as a way to just make sure everything was always up to date. You know, the opposite is you have this client who sends something over as an attachment in an email. Maybe they've attached a Microsoft Word document, and that's certainly fine. It just becomes really hard when you are wondering what version is the latest thing, when, you know, they've named it V2 and then you're like, I think they just sent me over V4. Are we still working on the same thing? So the great part about Google Docs is that it is all the same thing. Everyone can see across screens all around the world. And if you have a Google account, it's free to use. So you don't have to be adding on any fancy costs or anything like that. You can send it simply as a link in emails versus doing a fancy attachment or anything like that. So compared to where you, or based on where you're from, this may be like so obvious and something you use all the time, and or it could be something that's really new to you. So comment below where you're at. I'd be really curious if Google Docs is something you're like, yeah, I use it all the time, or whether this is like, wait, this is a little bit like a foreign language. What are you saying? But essentially, think of it like this amazing version of Microsoft Word that everyone can see all at once, where you have these docs you can jump in and out of no matter where you are in the world. You can all be working in the same doc. And it's more of a link that you would send in an email versus like an email attachment or PDF or thing like that. All right, so that'd be the first tech that is super helpful. The second one, now, if you start getting into working with clients, you will probably want a way to track your time and even to invoice. And so, one piece of tech that I really like for that is FreshBooks. There's a million out there. This isn't sponsored by FreshBooks or anything like that. I know it can sound like that, but it's not. But really, I'm just sharing what worked for me in building my business. And so, FreshBooks was one that I really stumbled into because I saw a lot of people in the industry using it. And I liked it because you could immediately organize your projects by client, by type of work. You can even do time tracking within FreshBooks. So that is super helpful because as soon as you dive into a project, you just start your time tracker and it keeps track of how many hours or minutes that you've spent working on a project. And then you press stop once you're done. But what's really cool is at the end of the month, you can go and look back and just press one button to immediately have a record of all the hours that you spent with the client and invoice them from that. So if you're charging by the hour, you can simply hit that button. It tallies up all the little minutes and everything that you did for a client, and you're able to invoice based on your hourly rate and send off that invoice. They can pay you right from that, and it just keeps it in one system really organized. So that was something that I really, really enjoyed with FreshBooks. So again, it's kind of a dual purpose. You can use it for time tracking, you can use it for invoicing, and it keeps all your clients and projects in one place. And they have some pretty amazing features with their free trial, with their free accounts. It wasn't really until I started building a team that I believe I had to pay anything at all. And even then it was maybe like $10, a person or, team member that I added just to keep track of their work as well. So pretty simple to use. Would recommend it if you haven't checked it out. The third thing that I really loved in terms of a project management perspective was Trello. Now, Trello is another one that can be completely free. I don't believe I ever ended up having to pay for Trello. I could scale and do everything I needed to a large extent without ever having to actually pay for it. So thank you, Trello. Again, not sponsored, just sharing my experience. What I loved about Trello is it's a great way to keep track of your process. So in the beginning, if you have one client, you may not need to keep track of that much. You may be like, okay, I've got my one client. I know what dates to send them things. I can keep, like all that held in my brain. But as you start to get more clients and more deadlines, you might want something that can just help you keep a bird's eye view of all of it. And that's Trello. And so what I would do in Trello is basically be able to see whether something was in like the queue or lineup for writing, whether it was in the writing process, the editing process, whether it was being sent off to the client, whether it was done. And I could really see like where everything was at all times. And I could also have this library then or list of projects that I'd worked on broken down by client. I could see the dates that I completed them. And so it became really, really handy as I started to want to refer back to certain projects or include them in my portfolio or just remember like what I worked on when a few months later to have it all kept in Trello. The other great part about Trello is like you can, attach certain links. So if you're working in those Google Docs and you're writing your post or your blog post or social media, you can add that as a link in Trello. And so as you're moving your projects from writing to editing to completion, that link really follows it and you're able to see and keep track of what the project was and how it ended up and what the final revision looked like. So those are a few pieces of tech that I love. I would say they're the ones that I definitely use the most often in my content writing career. And they're the ones that are, like many things in content writing, free or they're very low cost. And that's really only once you start scaling and needing fancy features. I'd be curious to hear. I know there's so many out there when it comes to the things we talked about, whether it's time tracking or project management or invoicing or even writing. If there are other tech or tools that you love, let me know in the comments and let me know if you have any questions about any of these or other things that you're curious about as it comes to getting started with all this tech. I hope that didn't get too like technical and still makes a little bit of sense and gives you some ideas, but would love to hear. So thank you so much for watching. And I will share some links below if you want to check out additional trainings or things that may support you in building your own content writing business. Thank you for being here.